Welcome to The Hill's Coronavirus Report. I'm Steve Clemons, editor-at-large of The Hill. Each day we are interviewing consequential leaders in the battle against the coronavirus. Washington State was the first in the United States to identify a COVID-19 case. By mid-March, the city of Seattle, a little more than just 10% of that state's population, transitioned to a stay-at-home order after a nursing home there was found to have a cluster of cases. That quick action by state and local officials may have saved many lives. As Seattle tries to help its residents in the midst of this pandemic, President Trump issued an executive order halting all immigration. The mayor of Seattle directly addressed President Trump then, saying, quote, "Our city desperately needs the president to focus on supplies, testing, and a plan based in science to address this pandemic." The president's newest distraction is him yet again scapegoating families and workers to cover up for his administration's continued mishandling of the COVID-19 pandemic. Strong words. Joining me now is Jenny Durkan, mayor of Seattle. Yesterday, the mayor issued an economic forecast for Seattle with two economic scenarios, one for rapid recovery and another for slow recovery. Both scenarios highlight significant job loss and high unemployment. Mayor Durkan, thanks so much for joining us. And let me just get to the report you issued about the economy. What are the big factors in whether you've got a fast return or a slow return?
So it's a couple things, but one thing I think your viewers want to know, for even a fast return imagines we're going to be in this for a year or two. And a slower return is a longer horizon. So we are going to face a challenge that the city government has never faced in the history of Seattle, at least in many generations. It dwarfs what happened in 2008. We are at least probably 20% of our general fund budget will be missing because we don't have the business taxes, the sales taxes, the things that usually prop up local governments. And I think we need to find solutions across the nation for this, because I think what we've seen is that mayors have been the front line in this fight with their county executives and their governors. And we have for long have been the safety net of America and the laboratory for America. But if we start to get decimated, it will affect everybody in every community across the United States. So getting relief to every city, small and large, is going to be a critical thing for Congress to do.
You know, Seattle was one of the key beachheads of the COVID virus attack in the United States, if you will, and Governor Jay Inslee and you were constantly on TV, constantly talking about what was going on and what you needed. And I guess I would ask the same thing of you I recently asked of Mayor of Miami, Francis Suarez. How do you look at the federal government and what it did or didn't do? Is that a factor for you now?
So I think there's going to be a lot of time to do a backward glance. But some of it we have to do now, because we have to have learned the lessons of how we got here as we reopen our economies and our society and our communities, as we come back together. Because if we don't learn those lessons, we will be right back in the same place in a very short period of time. In fact, it'll be a worse place because we're starting at a higher level of known infections. So, for example, everyone says the key to opening the economy is to have adequate testing and contact tracing. And what Americans need to know is, I don't believe there's any city or any state in America that is ready to do that. We certainly aren't here in the Northwest. We have had a continual struggle to get adequate testing just up for diagnostics. So if we really want to not make the mistake, if we don't want to miss the growth of the virus as we open up the community, we need more testing. And we have to have the federal government in charge, because no city or state can take control of the production needed for America to be strong. I'm harking back to when I was a kid. I wrote a report. We were doing a thing in American history, and we had to give an example of American exceptionalism. And I wrote a report on how at the beginning of World War II, we knew that we would need as a nation a lot of rubber for every Jeep tire, for every airplane tire, for a range of things. But rubber production was solely controlled behind enemy lines. And so we started the domestic production of rubber, and without that, probably would not have won the war. We won't win this war if the nation does not harness its innovation and its manufacturing capability and show people how to do testing and contact tracing.
With contact tracing, you know, I know that there's a debate emerging that whether through your cell phones or others, you're going to be able to have a digital map, if you will, of where people have had, and you can go back and do that. And I know in Singapore, they're beginning to work with PwC in finding a way that people can track where they've been and who they've been in contact with. Does that worry you on the other end, which is privacy and just being tracked? I mean, what's the trade-off there between contact tracing and people's concerns about, sacrificing their digital freedom?
I think that there's some real legitimate concerns about the digital freedom. What information do you collect? How do you keep it? Who keeps it? What do they use it for? I also think that I just have a significant concern that we won't be able to get that up and running because of those concerns in time that we need it. So my guess is we end up with a hybrid system, one that relies heavily on technology, but also requires humans to do the ordinary gumshoe work you need to do with contact tracing.
Now, you and I met in February in Washington, D.C. when the Conference of Mayors was going on, and one of the things we talked about where the 50-plus community was in Seattle, how they were being engaged. And we also talked about some of Seattle's challenges on the homeless side of things. And these were, you could call them pre-existing factors before the COVID virus hit. How are you dealing with those without necessarily the same resources that the upper ends of the socioeconomic spectrum have? How are you dealing with the homeless problem and their vulnerability to COVID?
So at the very beginning of this, we knew we were going to have to focus our resources on both those most vulnerable health-wise and those most vulnerable economically. And looking at our aging population and our homeless population, we very concertedly worked with local county officials to make sure we could stand up a range of new shelter space so that people in existing shelters could have more distance between them, as recommended by our health officials. We also, with the county, stood up a number of quarantine and isolation facilities so people who may not be able to recuperate at home because they had no home would have somewhere to go to. And right now, I think we're seeing across America that ground zero for the ongoing fight against this virus is in our senior population. Seattle and Washington State, like everywhere else, is seeing significant virus spread in our senior centers. And it is one of the greatest challenges I know that King County Public Health and the State Department, the Washington State Department of Health are addressing. We've met with them many times, have offered our resources. We trained up our own fire department to help them. But it is a huge, huge challenge here. And we need to be able to get into those senior facilities to literally save lives.
What more do you need to make that work better than it is?
So again, it goes back to two things. One is adequate testing capabilities. We still don't have it. We started a program last week to try to get in as strike teams to our senior centers. And the test kits were recalled because some of them were contaminated. They were kits that one of our medical centers had obtained overseas. And it just goes to show you, Steve, it's like a scavenger hunt. You have cities and states and medical facilities literally hunting the world for basic supplies like testing swabs and masks for our health workers. We can't have that and win this fight. If we don't have a sustained ability to have a supply of the basic things we need to fight this virus, we won't be successful. And so we need to quit pitting city against city, state against state, and have a cohesive plan for America.
Well, I think it's a very important statement you just shared. There's sort of this law of the jungle out there right now. The Maryland's Governor Larry Hogan recently acquired 500,000 test kits from South Korea, and the president wasn't thrilled about that. We've been reading stories today and yesterday over federal seizures of equipment that have been going to hospitals and cities and places around the country that have been seized without transparency as to where they're going. How bad is that scene? Because it sounds crazy.
It's terrible. I mean, I think that, when you have literally cities trying to find source stuff in China, in Korea, in Italy, and then I can recall one event where we had masks come into a port in California that the state thought they were going to be able to get, and then they ended up in a bidding war with others. So it is, again, it goes back to, everyone's staying at home right now that is watching any amount of TV. How many pharmaceutical ads do you see? They are on all the time. Those companies have some of the most innovative manufacturing capability in the world. It has to be turned to developing first the diagnostic testing capability. Second, testing for antibodies. And then third, long term, that if we can get a vaccine, that we can do it at a very significant level. And every American has a right to that. And that won't happen if we just let market forces do it. We have to be able to make sure that happens so that we can successfully get out of this and reopen the most innovative economy there is.
So, Mayor, how do you do that? Because, I mean, we see in Georgia right now where the governor is opening nail salons and, massage places and other points of business, and the mayor of Atlanta is saying, don't open, don't get away from social distancing, read the science. And so you have tension within the state in real time today over this. And we have Scott Gottlieb, the former FDA commissioner who worked for President Trump, saying, we're not going to have the layer of testing you say that we need until September or October. So what does the ground between now and September or October look like? Are we in real jeopardy?
So first, I think that Mayor Bottoms, like Mayor Benjamin in South Carolina, are really doing a public service by raising the right questions. And this all works better if officials work together to find a path forward. I can't say enough about Governor Inslee and the leadership he's given in Washington State. But we've had mayors and county executives throughout the state of different parties working things out and figuring out a path forward. So number one is you can't make this a political issue. It is a public health issue. And the virus is going to produce and replicate and transmit according to the laws of science. And so you have to start with that as your premise. And second, we know people are weary of being inside. We also know this has had devastating impacts on so many Americans, so many people in Seattle, workers, small businesses, and we need to be able to reopen our society to bring people back together and our economy. But if we don't do it in a smart and measured way and see what is happening as we do it, we literally will not only be back where we were in February, we'll be in a worse place. I likened it the other day. Everyone's been in a shopping mall where you can take the elevator up to the top floor, and then you have to take the escalator down, and you have to usually circulate halfway through the floor. But we shut this economy down by taking the elevator up, even though we did it gradually on a dial. Now we're going to have to take the escalator down level by level and see, how do we bring people together? What jobs can be done safely? How do we change how business does its work? And we have to do that by relying on business to work with us and to say, here's the safety measures we think you need to take. How does that work in your business? And we've seen, for example, how grocery stores operate today is very different than when we started this, because they realized they had to change how their stores operated in order to keep people safe. We're going to have to do that sector by sector. We're not going to get it all right. We will see a rise in the disease, but what we can't let happen is to be blind to that rise. And so it's out of control again, and the only options we have is what we just did, which is shut everything down.
Mayor, in our last minute or so, I'm going to ask you a question on sort of a different track and ask you what you would encourage people to do who are watching this, what role they can play. And what I'm inspired by, you've been such a great leader for the LGBTQ community, and we were just talking, you and I, about Mayor Suarez, Francis Suarez in Miami, who donated his plasma after recovering to help other patients that are critically ill and trying to. But gay folks have been told they can't donate their plasma, and I just want to ask your thoughts on that, and then expound on it and say what else can everyone do out there that they may not thought of to play a constructive role in this crisis.
Well, Steve, I think it's ironic about the blood donation, and we're seeing such an intersection and replay in many ways of the AIDS crisis of the late 80s and early 90s. And, we had a virus that was spreading. No one knew the cause. There was no vaccination for it and no cure for it. And Dr. Fauci was leading the charge to find one. And here we are, decades later in a very similar battle. And so I think what we should have learned before that I hope we learn now is we really have to, A, base it on science, and B, we cannot vilify anyone or, do what was done early on in this to try to label this, for example, a Chinese virus. And we saw a lot of acts of discrimination and harassment in our community against the Chinese American community. You know, we're all in this together, and every community everywhere is going to have to dig deep. And I will tell you, I have been so inspired by the way that Seattle has responded to this. Just this week, I had a conference call with some of the owners of small businesses in Seattle, most of them from communities of color, whose businesses had to close down because of our orders. But they found a way to keep their kitchens open to feed their community. And those are the kinds of inspirational acts of selflessness and courage that we're seeing day after day. And I really want to highlight those people, you know, from our frontline healthcare workers and first responders, but to the people who are feeding their communities, finding creative ways to check on people, make masks. I've seen much more of that than I've seen of the negative, and that's what gives me hope and inspiration.
Well, Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkan, this has been a great and important conversation. Thank you so much for all that you're doing. And thank you to all of you for joining me today. See you tomorrow. I'm Steve Clemons. Be well.